Good afternoon and welcome to the 35th installment, actually, of our Raw Compliance webinar series. And today we're going to be doing this in collaboration with AML Watcher. As many of you probably saw on the posted kind of overview of what we're going to discuss today, our speaker was to be Mark Bain. Mark is unfortunately stuck at passport control. So stepping in for him today is the amazing Zarek Han, also from AML Watcher, and he's the product growth manager. Zarek has a lot of experience in how AI is currently being adopted by the industry and has a number of use cases. So what's going to be really great is Zarek's going to be able to bring a lot of the relative theory and show us real life examples of how that's working in practice. So I'm your moderator today, Oonagh van den Berg, founder of Raw Compliance, a global training platform and community where we're helping to bring affordable and where we can free training to the compliance community at large. And I will pass it over to you, Zarek, to introduce yourself.
Well, Una, thank you so much for the warm introduction. I think after everything I'll say will be, we don't be adding much value. My name is Zarrak. As you mentioned, I have around a 2 years experience in the regulatory technology field, and recently launched our product AML Watcher, and it's based on bridging the gap between the evolvement of technology versus where we are at the regulatory end. So we have been doing the bridging part of technology with the regulations for some while now, and I'm just glad to be here of sharing all of that knowledge with you and with your audience.
Wonderful. So without further ado, let's kick off today. So we have some slides. Hopefully everybody should be able to see the slides. We're going to be talking about use cases for AI in the compliance space, predominantly in financial crime. What have been the challenges to implementation, and what we really need to know today and future trends that are going to be coming through. So on that note, as mentioned, we're going to be talking about risk management, challenges to implementation, and we've also touched on some of the country-specific AI regulations that we see coming through. We won't spend a lot of time on those today because we really just don't have the time. And if we did, this could turn into a 3 to 4 hour presentation. But what you will do afterwards is you will be provided with a copy of the presentation. So in your own time, you can go through the various countries and see for yourself how that's evolving. And the disparity in the evolution is obviously causing us some challenges as well in respect of global implementation for organizations. So without further ado, kind of introducing AI in compliance, it's fair to say, Zarek, that AI technology is revolutionizing compliance strategies in the financial industry. And only this week, we actually saw a case reported where a large global bank was actually, an enforcement action was taken because of a lack in human resourcing. But if you read the lines in the case, it actually is rather an automation issue where if a control had been adequately automated with the right technology employed, there wouldn't potentially have been a compliance breach of the regulation. So is it fair to say from an AI perspective that we're really seeing the beginning of AI incorporation, or are we still just at a stage of advanced automation?
Yeah, I think that's a fairly good question and quite a hard one to answer as well. I think that it is very essential to first define the term AI, because mostly what companies and what people are doing is that they're mixing it up with LLMs and large language models and Gen AI. So the integration of AI in regulatory technology, it's one of the very different ones. Just as you have mentioned that there's a this difference between compliance automation versus how it's done by AI. And I can I can think of many such examples where AI actually helped in automating processes and helping managing many such cases. One such example I can think of is that when Rishi Sunak became the president of the prime minister, sorry, of the UK, and his PEP level was changed instantaneously from PEP level 3 to PEP level 1. And it took a little while for algorithms to pick data from adverse media and to transfer that unstructured data to structured data. So transfer of that data type was very difficult if had it not been supported by AI. So there's many such different use cases in which AI actually helps identifying those changes, identifying those patterns. And I can also think of the example of Vice, for example. There was a transaction of just 250 pounds, but it was not reported in a timely fashion. So FCA did send them a warning that things could get a little out of control if they did not take the proactive action. So I agree with you 100% on it that AI is going to help. It's actually going to build the pillar of compliance automation, and it's going to be playing a supportive technology role instead of just a word on its own.
Absolutely. But I think it's also fair to say that, AI is an umbrella term for a lot of underlying subsets of AI technology. And we're seeing different ways in which those are being incorporated, which we'll come to later on. But if I may just kind of take a step back, you have mentioned about, recent enforcement action because of compliance breaches, which is nothing new to all of us. But one thing that is new is how we're using technology, but that technology is having to be adopted in line with an evolving regulatory framework. And if we look at the comparison with, for example, the crypto space, one of the great things about working in the crypto space is with a lack of a regulatory environment, we've been able to go straight for a real risk-based approach in compliance risk management. We've had to look inherently at the products, the services, the clients, the geographic landscape, really understand what our inherent risks are to build out that framework. But the great thing is we've had the history of financial regulation in the sector to kind of leverage off. So we understand what good looks like. But in the AI space, we haven't had that. This is something brand new. So what do you think AI regulation and how is regulation going to impact the adoption, given that this is something that we haven't seen before and we don't really have a point of reference when looking at adoption?
But I think compliance, in a general sense, it's a double-edged sword. So whatever we build, whatever law we pass for a compliant space, as we call it, it is going to inflict an equal amount of pain on the client end as well. So there's going to be delays in onboardings. There's going to be, data privacy issues. Ju- just as when I say data privacy issues, I can go on of talking UBOs and also that kind of debate. So it's a double-edged sword at the end of the day. But to resolve that concern of being a double-edged sword, I think that is why there are being regulations passed on a responsible AI, compliance driven through responsible AI, because otherwise there's no a I call this, there's no point of that reference where there's actually where there's a middle body that can mitigate all those concerns. Okay, this is what we call it's going to into the user privacy thing, and this is what we call it's the safe uses of data. This data should be public, this data should be not be public, this data should be only be with certain regulatory bodies. So to resolve all those concerns, to bring everyone onto a single page, that's why the we build regulations upon regulations, so that to align all stakeholders on a single page. And in terms of your you asked about having a AI regulation specifically on different different regulatory technologies. So I think when I say this is a double-edged sword, I think there's a lot of regulatory pressure to do a lot of things in a very little span of time.
Yes.
So what happens is that companies, and it calls for innovation from the solution providers perspective, and once they build something new, it suddenly turns out that it was not built on the foundations of privacy. It was not built on the foundations of privacy by design. Just as you have mentioned, cryptocurrencies, I know that there's a crypto travel rule that has a very very kind of itchy kind of relation with regulators, with solution providers, and the users of crypto wallets. They say that it was built on the privacy by design concept, and now when you take it out of the crypto world, there's no point of using crypto wallets. But then there's travel rule that requires certain data to be passed with the wallet transfers. So there's many kind of misalignment with different stakeholders. So
No,
that
totally. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so that's why I think that once we build the core foundations of developing deployment of AI in compliance, it's the very much need of the hour to resolve all those concerns so that we can effectively introduce effective compliance to the world.
No, no, totally agree with you. And one of the things we're going to be exploring later on is with regards to bias and ethical concerns, transparency, reporting standards as well, and accountability and privacy. So we're going to be looking at all of those later on in today's discussion. But absolutely right, Sark. These are kind of key points. And before we kind of go into the implementation, one of the key things that we get asked quite often is how are organizations navigating these challenges? So, they're looking to adopt AI. And one of the things that I've been very mindful of, and a lot of discussions around recently, even in a conference I was at a couple of weeks ago, a lot of organizations are currently looking at data because they need to clean up data before we can even begin the AI implementation. And people are talking about their data lakes or data pools. And one of the comments that was made was, in fact, some organizations have data sewage pits. And let's be honest, the data, there are multiple sources of the truth, multiple systems operating, catching data for similar and I wouldn't say opposing, but different reasons. So organizations, before we can even begin to discuss AI adoption, there was a massive cleanup exercise, one in data to get one source of the truth, and really understand that that data that you're sourcing is the data that you want to use and it is credible and accurate. But secondly, a lot of organizations have multiple existing systems that may be actually providing similar services, either through mergers and acquisitions or historical reasons. Our systems have been adopted to bridge gaps in audit findings or regulatory remediation. So the question is to you, whenever you see clients looking to begin to adopt AI technology, how difficult for them has that whole exercise been to start with, to basically clean the house?
Right. So I think that is the heartbeat of the whole AML data compliance, world. And this is what we realized 4 years back when we started building AML Watcher, is that the data sources are not very interoperable. But now that has been, I can think of the EU's Beneficial Ownership Interoperability Act that is like trying to homogenize data formats and data standards. But once we talk about the AML data as the whole umbrella, it is going to be coming from many different countries that have names and lists in different languages. Links are going to break, and then there's interoperability issues. For instance, if I can go a little bit of technical here, uh, one sanction list would call this like an entity name, and then they have all those names listed down there. Another sanction list would call this like a just a person name or just a simple name. So all of those formats do not match with each other. So once what happens is that when any AML or like any other compliance technology is being built, so what happens is that when you merge all of those different kind of records into a single repository, it does not add up very well with each other, and there's no integration. So what happens is that the world has a lots and lots of data dump, but it is not into a form where it can be used effectively for the compliance purposes. So you have mentioned that AI is the like the step two. First we need the AML data, and then only then you can build an AI program on top of it. But what we propose is that you can also use AI to clean up the data that you have with yourself. For
Yeah.
instance, and this is where a lot of work is being done at AML Watcher, at many other global companies as well, that we clean and we repurpose many of our data dumps of unstructured data, and we convert into a structured and a similar homogeneous form so that it can be used for our compliance purposes. So what happens is that can I go a little bit of more technical?
Oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Perfect. So what happens is that once we retrieve different names from sanction list, or like from different politically exposed person lists, many of those names are going to be in different scripts. Many of those names are going to have punctuations, extra spaces, and all that sort of stuff. So once a client is looking for an entity, they do not find exact or potential matches because they're missing out the punctuations. They are using aliases. They are using RCAs. So all of that then jots down to the data at hand. So what we do is that we introduce we use a data cleansing algorithm that actually makes that actually enhances the data quality and enhances the dump that we have. So for instance, if the OFAC list only has listed I do not want to use any like real world example here. Let's say the OFAC list has only mentioned John Doe, because that's who we
Mhm.
love. The whole world loves John Doe. So if we use John Doe's example, so whatever we do is that, or what any other data provider would do, that they would convert that John Doe into different languages. They would keep a phonetics code of that John Doe with themselves. They would make their own structured format of a data. They would try to enrich all those fields through different adverse media screenings. If they found an adverse media screen and it's a match with the same entity, they would then later transform into a structured format and enrich all of those fields. So this is how AI is actually used it's being used in the field to enrich the data that we get from different PEP lists, from different sanction lists, and also to make into a form that can be used over a broad range of use cases. That is not just possible if we just simply use the data from the sources. So I think it's not the step two of using AI after cleansing data. AI is being used to clean the data itself. So it is now involved end to end in the whole AML compliance regime.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for giving that, examples in terms of implementation. Just what everybody's seen on the screen right now is just some of the country examples of AI regulation. And as you can probably see, there's a common theme running throughout this. Whilst countries are focusing on some specific areas, international collaboration, safety and security, and ethical frameworks are the number one concern across the board. So we should expect to see many more, not just PPP, public-private partnerships coming through in respect of AI adoption and how the industry is working together to create the safest way in which we can use it. But secondly, one of the things that's very important is that we begin to see more international cooperation as well. And if I may say, and not to use a platform to do this, but it would be wonderful as well to see much more female involvement. Just this week, it was announced in the US on the new AI committee, and it's a committee full of men, which is wonderful. So it would be really great to see much more women being on the forefront of this and being involved as well. It's really important as we move forward in an industry of equality and ethical considerations that we bring that in at the very, very beginning of the use case adoption. So innovation solutions and AI in financial crime specifically, five ways that we've really been seeing this employed have been with the very kind of base point, data analysis and pattern recognition, which is going to be really great to begin to start profiling our customers. Our current transaction monitoring systems are very much rule-based and scenario-based. We bucket clients by risk and also by various sectors, industry typologies, account usage, and we're monitoring them that way. And the truth is, the best way in which to really understand changes in our client profiles, whether that be potential illicit activity or indeed to help provide them with the relevant services they need, is to understand changes in their use cases and their appetites. So profiling for our customers is really going to be the future. And again, we've already seen that in the consumer space, whether it's with the likes of Amazon, Facebook, etc. You'll begin to see kind of suggestions on different things you may be interested in. And we need to adopt that into the financial crime space and within the banking space in order to provide life cycle management to our clients throughout their evolution of their needs, from whether they're university leaver, first job, buying a first home, maybe getting married, starting a family, whichever order that takes, or whatever they do. We need to be able to understand the different financial products they're going to need at those points in their life cycle. Obviously, real-time monitoring, behavior analytics, NLP, we've already seen that adopted across the board in many chatbots we're seeing within organizations. And obviously machine learning. We're at the very, very early stages of machine learning. And I think we're probably 2 to 3 years away really from seeing the real results in that, given the learning process and the need to remove bias as well from the systems, which will be a learning curve. So I don't know, Zarek, if you want to just talk to any of these specifically.
Yeah, most definitely. I think one of the biggest innovations is being done is that uh, data analysis and pattern recognition is done via you feed a lot of data to a machine, and then it learns from that data. You label some of the data and you do not label some of the data, and then there's a confusion matrix, and then you eventually build your algorithm. So what happens is that the world's data is too vast, and we do not have the enough data to train the models on all of the edge and all of the corner cases. So what happens is that our this is what I come to the point of bias, because our training data is very much biased to a limited number, and we cannot utilize that learning over a broad range of use cases. So what's happening is that companies are now increasingly building their own synthetic data, and that synthetic data is then used later on to train those models again and again. So it
Yeah.
becomes a chase engagement, but eventually the model's strengths can be seen to have a significant improvement when it's trained on a synthetic data on top of the data that we can get from the real world. I know there's a lot of research centers. I'm forgetting the name of one, but there are many research centers in Europe that are just building many synthetic data repositories that can be used in transaction monitoring, that can be used in name screening, and I think that is where that this is where all of the our existing technologies can take a very huge leap in terms of their model improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about improvements, you very nicely segued us into the next point of discussion, Zarek. So thank you for that. You know, in terms of kind of efficiencies and economies of scale, one of the things that really puts a lot of organizations off is the potential return on investment, the ROI of adopting new technology. And for many organizations, this will be a global implementation requirement. But what we are beginning to see is a cost reduction and significant improvements on efficiencies and decision making within organizations once AI frameworks have been adopted, even with regards to better reporting. And you could argue, well, that's because the data is cleaned up, so we know where we're sourcing the data. Well, that's actually true. But what we're able to do with that data, as you've rightly said, through predictive analysis, is really begin to better understand our customers and their needs, which will only benefit both the customer and the organization, and not just developing our relationship with the customer, but being able to better service our customers in a timely manner. But obviously, being able to identify any immediate changes in the client's profile, which could be indicators of illicit activity. And in today's age, with significant increases in the likes of money mules, for example, that is not something that would be picked up in our day-to-day transaction monitoring systems. But with the usage of AI, we would immediately notice new third parties that are being involved, changes in maybe low end volumes going out. And it's, there's a misconception, people, when they talk about money laundering, they're always thinking about large sums and large numbers. Most money laundering goes under the radar because it is broken down into smaller bite-sized chunks to avoid, whether it's CTR, currency transaction reporting in various locations, or indeed to defeat rules and scenarios within various banks. So would you maybe just like to talk to this about how AI is going to contribute to risk management in compliance settings going forward?
Yeah, I think you have very wonderfully summarized the issue with we have with the current AML regime. We call this the ineffective AML regime because we're only focusing on the big picture and the things that can be easily put a red flag on, but we cannot go a one depth level further to identify how those smaller transactions are made and how all those smaller transactions and then data integrated into the system. So I think there needs, on the regulatory end, there needs to be a rethink of how we define a source versus a sink. A source could be many different kind of like 1,000 or 10,000 small transactions that fall below the radar, but eventually they do constitute towards the money laundering. And sink is that's something where AI and all such technologies can help to identify that, okay, even if there's like 10,000 different sources and all of them fall below the radar, the sink, the ending, like the beneficial ownership point of all of those transactions is this single entity, and then that needs to be screened against all of the AML compliance protocols to be to have like a slight bit of chance to have a effective AML regime. Just as you mentioned about the trade-off, like for instance, I know that for one of our clients who were based in the UAE, they had a problem that their sales team were saying that we are sending you so many customers and you're not onboarding all of them. And on the other hand, there was a compliance team who were saying that, oh, our screening process takes at least 3 days to properly screen a customer, and then we can onboard them. What happened 1 year down the line is that they onboarded like 10 to 20,000 different entities, and now there's a UAE law that requires ongoing monitoring for all of the onboarded customers whenever if they are onto like a financial application. So the number like quickly exploded to like 100,000 screenings a day, and it led to a lot of false positives. It led to a lot of different kind of false hits and everything. So had it not been for an effective risk management control, all of the compliance team would just have ended up into a tail chase. So that's why effective risk management, which is powered by good data, which is powered by good AI technology, that's how compliance teams can effectively prioritize which entity to look first, which entity to look second. And then there's a second step of having, on the regulatory end, that we need to work on the sync side of the transactions and not only just focus on the source side of it.
Absolutely. And in terms of implementing, obviously, we've talked already about challenges and opportunities and trends that we're seeing. But one of the things that it always comes back to is a discussion around data quality. But obviously, one thing we haven't addressed today is user competency. And that's something that I hear quite a lot, with speaking with respective people in the industry is, how are we helping innovation is great, but how are we educating and training our people internally to support the development of these tools? Obviously, that's, I'm sure, something that your clients continually are asking, and it's a concern they have. So how are you approaching that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the core foundational, pain points of the AML compliance industry. I say that a Ferrari is only as good as the driver driving it. So whatever technology, whatever something you build, it's only as good as long as it is being actually used and utilized to its full potential. So for user perspective, I think having simple tools is enough. I'm going to say something very counterintuitive, but I think simpler tools are better in terms of what they can achieve for you, instead of we make them compliant, complex and complex. I know that in the industry there's this very challenge, and many MLROs, and I don't know what they call MLRs in different countries, but there's many compliance officers that are required by law to set into different trainings. There's like 10-hour training on something, and then there's like
Yeah.
a 20-hour mandatory training on something. But eventually it is not linked with the real problems they have daily to daily onto a solution. So I think number one thing is that to build simpler solutions that do a lot of things but are still simple in terms of their intuitiveness, in terms of their interface, and in terms of how everything is laid out there. So simplicity is the number one thing.
Yeah.
Secondly, there's the point of there's mandatory trainings are already part of the regulations, and all of the state banks make the financial institutions follow all of the mandatory trainings. But those trainings should focus on something big. Those trainings should be a part of a feedback mechanism that MLROs can also give feedback to the solution provider that this is what they're facing right now, instead of having just a bottom down approach like, oh, this is what we do, this is how it needs to be done. There's need to be a reverse feedback loop where we listen to MLROs, we listen to compliance officers, and then we build on top of it how to effectively match our solutions with their workflows. So I think once we change our mindset, then we can effectively solve the problem of user dependency and users ability to use those tools correctly.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree with you more to, one of the points that you raised there, which is something I'm sure people are sick of listening to me, drumming on about constantly, is we need to train people with the skill set so they can walk in and do the job. It shouldn't just be theory. It has to be something practical when they're trained so they can understand when they walk into the job, this is how it works. So I think we really need to as well change the approach in training. As you rightly said, a 10-hour training session or a 2-day training session is going to be of no value. In fact, most people lose concentration after 7 minutes, unless you're constantly changing the delivery format. So that lack of expertise needs to be coupled with training, but training that's effective to allow the implementation to happen and gives specialized, if I can put that in inverted commas, knowledge for compliance teams involved in this. In fact, just earlier this week, I was talking about ESG, and a compliance officer was asking me, should I, as a compliance officer or the head of compliance, be going to ESG events, or should it be our sustainability officer? The truth is both. The truth is, if compliance isn't part of the discussion, how are we going to adapt the risk control framework to allow for the implementation? And how are we going to holistically understand the changes that need to happen? And I think that holistic point, again, there's a lot to unpack here, but that holistic point is so important. As we move towards AI, we're going to have to move away from silos within risk management frameworks. We're going to look much more comprehensively at risk management and more effectively and how we can bring up risk, compliance risk, credit risk, market risk all together so that we can streamline the controls across the board. And that is going to require change management. It's going to also require training, because we're going to have compliance officers working with operational risk officers, with credit officers, with market risk officers. So there is a big upskilling requirement, not just in the technology, but specific to the risk space. We're going to need much more rounded, if I may say, risk management officers. And I don't know, Zarek, if that's something that you've approached yet, or indeed any of your clients have been discussing.
Yeah, I think this is a like really wonderful point, and this is what I think this is the gap that is existing in the industry, and it comes down to thought leaders like you and raw compliance that effectively take out a MLRO from their desk, just doing like daily screenings, and make them focus on the bigger picture of this stuff, and this holistic perspective of including risk from many different departments instead of just name screening or just the system they are using. That's how we can effectively approach the bigger problems at hand. I think you have summarized it really well, that this is where the industry should be heading, and I think your platform would be the right channel to approach this problem.
Thank you, Zarek. Appreciate that. But one of the points as well that I think is really important here is, obviously there will be ethical and legal concerns within many organizations with AI adoption. And we will make, I wouldn't say make mistakes, but during the adoption process, there are going to be trial and error along the way in terms of how this works for us. And we talk a lot about, innovation, but innovation needs to be coupled with psychological security. And that psychological security is being allowed to make a mistake, because mistakes is how innovation happens. For example, the recipe for Coca-Cola didn't happen overnight. It's multiple processes. So the question here is, are we as an industry providing enough psychological security to our people to facilitate innovation, or is innovation being stifled within the industry because of a lack of ownership of making mistakes? Or secondly, even from a regulatory perspective, is the regulatory environment supporting innovation in the right way, in understanding that we will not always get it right, but we will learn from that to make it better?
I think it is not just the problem of our compliance industry. It's the problem of the whole greater world right now. There's a concept being introduced to the world, is that move fast and break things, and then again move fast. So there needs to be an opportunity to just slow down and analyze a problem firsthand, and analyze it very deep enough to identify the real challenges that are going behind the problem. So for instance, if if I'm like soaking wet in the rain, and I asked you for a towel, so you are just if you just hand it over to me and think the problem is solved, then no, the problem is not solved. I needed an umbrella because I was soaking in the rain. I did not need a towel. So that's how the approach of thinking problems needs to be first defined, and it will be only be done once we slow down, look back, and thoroughly analyze a problem first, and then we implement solutions from a customer first, or like from a value first perspective instead of a technology first perspective. This is, I might sound a bit counterintuitive there, but I think there are a lot of technologies, a lot of things that are being introduced to the world that are technology first instead of problem first. So that dilemma, that challenge needs to be resolved first, and we need to rethink our approach on how we approach innovation. Just as you have mentioned, is that if we are getting enough support from regulators on the innovation end, and on that front, I would say that. On the that necessity is the mother of invention, as we call it. So I think necessity, regulators are making a lot of things necessary in terms of what they need from compliance reports, in terms of the number of amount of screening that they have uphold, and it has like worked really well that innovation has become like a response to all of to meeting all of those regulatory and challenges.
Yeah.
So I think it is working hand in hand, but it is not working in a direct or in a collaborative approach. I do suggest that because the regulatory and pressure is like increasing, and innovation, effective innovation that results in effective compliance is still trying to catch up there. So if there's like a direct involvement of all of the stakeholders, including regulators, including researchers, including solution providers, including banks and clients, and also that sort of stuff, if they all come to a single table to think and brainstorm solutions, that might result in such kind of innovation that is really effective and that is really focused on the underlying pain points that are no way to be addressed right now, and that has resulted in us having a technology first approach, which is the wrong one in my opinion.
Yeah. Just as an FYI, if you ever see me stuck in the rain, I would like both a towel and an umbrella. That would be for me the optimal approach, or somewhere to get out of the rain. But no, you addressed the point very, very well there in terms of continuous improvement. We need to constantly monitor and evaluate whether whether what we're doing is actually optimal. As you rightly said, and you couldn't have said it better, Zarek, we are moving at lightning speed at the moment in terms of our digital evolution within the financial sector. The way in which we bank, the products and services, and way in which they're provided, and indeed the design of products and services is changing before our eyes at a speed that has never happened in our lifetime, and most likely will never happen again going forward. Now we've entered the digital age. Gone is the day of the high street bank. The Gen Z, the new generations come through, they all want ease of access, simplicity, and speed. But as you rightly said, sometimes we need to slow down in order to speed up. It's a bit like meditating. You need to take that moment to really kind of be in the moment in order to make better decisions. So as you rightly said, we're moving at such a speed at the moment, but that speed needs to be coupled with, are we learning the right things from it? What is the good we're learning? What is the bad we're learning? And not being ashamed or afraid to talk about the mistakes that we're seeing happening, and not being hesitant to share those. And we talk about public-private partnerships, and it's really important that those conversations become Chatham House rules, in that people can go into an environment where they can openly discuss, well, actually, this is what we tried. This is where we wouldn't say we didn't succeed, but we found some challenges, and this is how we overcame them. And only through that open dialogue are we really going to be able to foster effective change. But there needs to be that sense of security and trust that in those public-private partnerships and those discussions, that people will not be kind of reprimanded, so to speak, for raising the fact that mistakes did happen. So as an industry, to better foster that culture of innovation, what do you think we can do better?
um uh, it is more of a like management and perspective that we have been doing in our company, is that we try to focus on, just I have mentioned previously, there's two approaches for innovation. Number one is technology first. You take a technology and you try to fit into a different problems, and then you see that now either things are better or things are not better. And then there's a customer first approach. Customer first approach is what I recommend to organizations, in which what we do is that we actually go out to different customers, we do surveys, we talk to them on Zoom meetings, we analyze how they're using the product, we analyze their pain points, we ask them their unapologetic candid opinion on our services, on services that they're using for different use cases. And then we identify whether they're looking for a towel, or they need an umbrella, or they need both, or they are looking for a shelter. And so that that kind of approach is what we do at our at AML Watcher, and that's what I recommend to all of the companies as well, that listen to the customers first.
Yeah.
Customers are like, customers and clients and end users are being thrown to the bottom end of the funnel and mostly what people are doing is most people are trying to satisfy different stakeholders. If a stakeholder has mentioned the word like blockchain or something, people would like to use it again and again. And then there's marketing perspective, they want to be at the forefront of all of the innovation and all of the buzzwords that are being used in industry. So they will have their perspective of including a certain kind of technology first instead of the customer. So I think that approach has led the customer at the bottom of the funnel, and that customer needs to be at the forefront of it. And every technology and every solution should be in terms of it should be reverse engineered to solve that problem instead of a solution chasing a problem. So I think the world
Absolutely.
has reached a place where there's a lot of solutions that are trying to chase problems, and there are a lot of problems still unaddressed. So I think that's the thing we need at the management level to manage innovation successfully.
Couldn't agree more. And I have to say, AML Watcher sounds like a real fun place to work from the sound in your office. Or maybe people are just happy that it's I don't know, what's it, Tuesday? But also as well, one of the things that obviously we can really go into the weeds here, and we can talk about blockchain usage and predictive compliance. But one of the things that I really like about AI use cases is personalization within organizations. We're going to be moving away from off the shelf provision of products and services. AI systems will need to be tailor made to the specific needs of the organizations that they're going into, in context of the products, the services, the customers, the geographic landscape, industry exposure, etc. And I think that's something that's really, really important here as well. This needs to be bespoke, and we need to really make sure that organizations understand their risk framework before they step out asking for a solution. And that, of course, you could argue, well, what's the difference between today and future state, if you ask that? I think what we need to really re-examine is how we conduct AML risk assessments, and how we really are understanding the inherent risk holistically within our books, so to speak, and our products and services. I don't feel from many organizations that is being done well enough. And before we can move to the solution, we need to first understand the risks that we really need to mitigate, and also think with the evolution of the digital age, and obviously the evolution of risk appetite, is the risk appetite of your organization still aligned to your future case business model? And that's something, again, that we're seeing a lot of. So in terms of, maybe we won't go into too much detail here, because obviously, well, I know I'm not a tech specialist myself, but obviously there are different technologies that we're seeing coming through in the AI space, from quantum computing to adaptive systems, edge AI, etc. I don't know if you want to touch on this at all, Zarek, or if you want to just go straight into the ethics. Is there anything you want to speak to in this regard?
Yeah, just a little bit of on federated learning is that yeah, and also identity verification is that there's a lot of work being done by the government, because I'd like to mention this thing, that identity verification and federated learning are something that goes onto the bucket of governments. So there's a lot of pace, especially in the European Union, in which we are talking about self-sovereign identities, in which we are talking about digital identity wallets, and in which people and the only counter perspective of all such technologies is that if we make everything too centralized, then the government might become too powerful. And so that again puts down to the perspective of privacy by design versus transparency by design. So I think that's why the inclusion of federated learning and AI powered identity verification is that government is trying to take a hold of it through all of the initiatives like that are being done at the government level, because identity verification is the foundation upon which AML screening is built on. And a lot of gaps still exist in the identity verification industry, especially when we there's deepfakes, there's synthetic identities, and there's identity theft. So when we build a AI compliance regime that has a weak foundation, so this is where the government needed to step in, and they are trying to make identity wallets, and actually so that the whole AML compliance regime is built on the right entities. So I think the identity verification. It's a lot of, a lot of emerging technologies going to build on it. There's going to be blockchain involved, there's going to be smart contracts, there's going to be, proof of verifications and proof of identity, right, included into a federated and centralized body. But it again there's going to be a perspective of privacy by design versus transparency by design. And in terms of federated learning, I think there needs to be a lot of more data sharing between the government and the solution providers, because right now there's a bit of a, what I cannot really call it a paywall, but there's bit of a, black box after which a solution provider cannot access the data by from the government.
Yeah.
So if the government does not want to share the data, then it's perfectly understandable. But a federated learning model could help us both to build a right solution and to provide the clients with the right service, and as well as government taking control and ownership of that data. So I think
Yeah.
it's the way forward to devise the right AML compliance regime.
Yeah. Actually, yesterday I was having this discussion with regards to CBDC, the central bank digital currencies. And, we've seen obviously in China that has been rolled out, in this quarter nationally. And what we'll expect to see by the end is only 2% of fiat in circulation. And rather, it's going to be the digital yen that's being used. And, across the board, as we begin to see increased CBDC adoption, central bank digital currency adoption, I think we would be kidding ourselves if we don't expect to see more integrated reporting requirements, in module reporting requirements from regulators. We will begin to see much more plugins into banks and organizations because of the fact that there is a lot more transparency within the CBDC world. So exactly to your point in terms of government access and information, that is where we're moving to. And CDBC, that's exactly the next step that will happen. And again, in Europe, there's a whole discussion at the moment around kind of the digital version of the euro. Where will that leave the banks themselves in terms of their needs for technology versus the role of the central bank as well? So it's a very, very interesting and pertinent discussion point right now. So thank you for raising that, Zarek. So ethics and bias. And again, this is something that's just going to be, testing and evaluation and removing bias from data sets. As we process machine learning, making sure that we're removing the human bias from the human thought process behind it. I don't think that there is it's an overarching, this is how to prevent it. It really will be through trial and error. Is there anything at all you kind of want to pick up on this slide, or anything specifically you've seen on the client side and discussions you've been having?
Yes, most definitely. I think all kind of data sets on upon which AI and machine learning models are built, they cannot be taken out from bias. If you analyze closely enough, there is going to be some kind of bias, but you cannot see it because you are biased yourself. So it's, it's very, that kind of question that you can only see as far as your vision goes, and the bias exists right after 1 feet of where your vision ends. So I think that's the dilemma of it, that it is hard to see that bias because the seers themselves are included into that process. But from from a client perspective, I do know that transaction monitoring algorithms are very much prone to having that bias in their algorithms, and they're like rejecting multiple transactions on a false pattern recognition, and then there's delays, and then false positives, and all sort of that discussion. And I
Yeah.
think what is being done to reduce it is the inclusion of synthetic data to train models and to remove that bias from different models. So for instance, if we have like 100 data points or something, we might able to observe from a client perspective that there's 65% of a certain category that is dominating the whole data set. So what we do is that we take the 45% data set, we try to develop a synthetic data on top of it, so that all of the category, all of the quality, all of the data points, and all of the uh, qualities of those 45 data points that were in minority are like replicated, and then we make a 50-50 of the whole data set, and then we train our model again on it. So it's a
Yeah.
like a very, very continuous process. It happens like again and again based on the client feedback, based on what we learn from the bias. But synthetic data is the way forward to train effective AI models that can reduce the bias from our algorithms.
Absolutely. Really well said, Zarek. Thank you for that. And also, as well, I love to throw in some new acronyms. So, for anybody that's not familiar with them, XAI, explainable AI, and Zarek, you've talked to this earlier. Simplicity is key. Do not go with a big bang because it looks, dare I say it, sexy or it sounds great. Oh, I'm very, very much, and I'm always somebody that advocates for simplicity. Start with your base points, start with the foundations and build upon it. Do not over complexialize this. Compliance in itself is not rocket science. Unfortunately, some of us, however, seem to think that we are scientists and we like to make it that way. And it should, at its core, be simplistic. Ultimately, our goal here is to protect the financial integrity of the financial systems that we're working within, and also to service and protect our customers. So when we go back to creating these systems, remember, one, we're going to need to explain this. And HITL, human in the loop. There always needs to be a human in the loop. At the very beginning of AI, before we begin to start really using machine learning and predictive analytics, a system will only do what a human tells it to do. The system can only be corrected by that human also. So it's really, really important that we maintain that approach going forward. And obviously governance and oversight. When implementing these AI strategies, have a very clear governance and oversight. Zarek has mentioned here on quite a few occasions today, continuous monitoring, evaluation, do a post-mortem, constantly look, is this working? Is it holistic? Are we addressing the risk holistically enough? We don't want silo risk management going forward. We're trying to address holistic risk management because that's where we're really going to get the effectiveness, the efficiencies, and dare I say it, the ROI, the return on our investment. And just talking about an AI governance framework, Zarek, how would you, in terms of defining the roles and responsibilities, how important is that going to be for organizations?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And I think one of the key issues any client and face is that to, uh, to effectively delegate the areas of responsibility of everyone in the organization. So, whenever there's a new technology from either if we take the regulatory end or if we take the client end, whenever there's a new technology, there needs to be a very clear area of responsibility of whom is going to do what. Otherwise, what happens is that everyone is going all over the place trying to chase solutions, and at the end of the at the end of the quarter, nothing gets done. And the example is very evident in public use cases, that there's a lot of research, there's a lot of cost, there's a lot of consultants onboarded to do something, and at the end of the day it's just documents and there's nothing out there in the practical world that actually helps solve the problem. So I think having the right amount of people working on a single thing with very clearly defined smart goals of what needs to be done, that is the key to ensure that the AI governance model is effectively first adopted by the regulators and then effectively taken up by the client end. And this will take me back to my point that I have communicated previously as well, that they need to be working not in a silo, they need to be working on a single page to effectively devise an AI governance framework. Otherwise, what happens is that client end has a very different set of pain points, they have a very different set of priorities, and then regulatory, and they're not just seeing those problems with the same lens of eyes as the client end is experienced. So they devise something else and the client end is devising something else. So there's a lot of alignment issues when something is rolled out. So they just need to be on the single page, on a single table first, and only then they can uh, work effectively on devising the AI governance model, while having the right amount of people with a clear areas of responsibility defined.
Absolutely. And you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Having been in the industry over 20 plus years, although I don't look like I've been in the industry 20 plus years, clearly I've not been stressed enough. One of the things that I would say here clearly is, I've had the situations where across the years we've brought in consultants into various organizations I've worked in, and there's very much a fake it till you make it approach. A lot of these consultants, they're not necessarily expert in the area or specialized in the area you need them to be. And we will be fooling ourselves to say that people coming in from consultancy firms, unless they're really specialized, do have that AI knowledge that you're going to need. So there is going to be an element of learning together, but exactly to what you said, make sure that you have the right people involved. I even, even before AI, discussions, I even say this, to many people, when conducting your AML risk assessment, you are best placed to initially assess the implementation or initially assess your risk within your organization, because you will know your products, your services, your environment better than anybody else. And then to talk about how your controls are implemented to mitigate that risk within your risk appetite. What I would then do is bring in an expert to challenge me, to challenge my risk assessment and say, does this make sense? And that for me is an area for continuous improvement. It's a great way to learn and develop, but continuously challenge yourself as well. Just putting a new lens on something that maybe you hadn't thought about before. And AI adoption is no different. You know what you're going to need. You've got an idea of how that should look. You then want to bring in somebody that really understands this to have that dialogue, and then bring in the right people with the right skill sets and within your organization to help the implementation. Do not leave all of the implementation to external parties, because then you will lose the internally the knowledge once those people leave the building. And that's one thing that always frustrates me about change management. When it said, oh, we brought in these XYZ consultants to support us, or these people to support us in the implementation. The challenge is, when that happens and they leave the building, the expertise leaves the building. So you're going to need to couple that team very, well with internal employees supported by external specialists. And I would go with a 70-30 model, 70% internally, 30% externally. So we continually are retaining that talent in-house when the specialist team leave the building, and they will have hopefully transcended some of that specialist knowledge to the teams. I don't know if you would add anything to that as well, Zarek.
Yeah, most definitely. I think boutique consultancy is the kind of new concept that is being introduced, and I think raw compliance perfectly fits that gap. That you need to be the right person, the right kind of consultant who has seen the industry going from A to B, who has, over the course of years of your experience, you have seen a lot of systems being evolved in different things, and that external perspective may be like just the 30% of it, but that external perspective is the key that brings that holisticness to the discussion table. Because if there's just the internal team working on something, they're just too focused narrowly on the only their own set of experiences, and if they miss out the external influence, then they are going to be ending up with the very limited worldview. So that the extra 30% that comes from the external end, especially from the boutique consultancies, is the key to have that whole holistic perspective, so that we are not only just focusing on the problem of today, but also on the problems of tomorrow that are not initially in our worldview.
Absolutely. We're just conscious of time, because I think we have just a few minutes left. I've jumped over the slides in data privacy because we've addressed that in some of the discussions earlier. Obviously talking about approach for implementation of AI into compliance processes. We've kind of gone through that slide as you were talking. As I mentioned earlier, these slides will be made available to everybody post today's session. So if there's any slides you wanted to look at in more detail, or you want any further information about, don't hesitate to reach out to Zarek or myself, and we can help to explain the content and go through that. Again, future trends and emerging technology. You've talked about federated learning, XAI, explainable AI, blockchain integration. We didn't go into in too much detail, but that is going to be critical. We've talked about it before in the areas of trade-based money laundering, where we can actually bring what currently is today still a very manual, paper-based process into an automated environment that cannot be changed, that is locked in. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in trade-based money laundering. The difficulty that we're going to have there, however, is bringing parties into that aren't part of a regulated environment. And that's trade finance will continue to be a challenge across the board. And whether, we saw some of the examples in Singapore where we used blockchain, whether or not it would work from a trade finance perspective, it worked in country within the organizations, the banks, the financial institutions that were working together. But once we tried to bring it outside, there were challenges because, again, 92% of funding within the trade finance space is actually done from open source learning, i.e. unregulated providers. So again, there are a lot of things coming through. This is a massive area, so I'm not surprised that we didn't get through it all in today's session. But last but not least, just some key takeaways, Zarek. So, understanding your regulatory environment, understanding that there is going to be diversity globally in how we're going to approach this, and focus on ethics, privacy, implementation. But one of the things that you said really, really well there was talking about diversity of skill sets to drive through innovation. So is there anything additional that you would add today to our listeners that they can take away and discuss, or indeed come back to yourself for further discussion on?
I would only say that technologies are like walking sticks, and it is mostly dependent on the human beings using it, and it then jots down to their ability of making that change happen, and their ability to envision the problems of tomorrow and trying to solve them with the technologies of that we have on board today. So humans, I would say that they have the 80% of the bucket there to solve the problems, and 20% part will be done by technology. If humans are not willing to make that change and adopt new learnings and new technologies, that technology in itself would not be sufficient to make things happen and to make this AML regime very effective, as it is still not right now. So that would be my understanding.
Wonderful, beautifully said. So from umbrellas to towels to walking sticks, we have discussed implementation of AI technology into the compliance space, in particular in the financial crime space today. I want to say a massive thank you to Zarrak, Han, and the AML Watcher team for their contributions for today. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Again, as said earlier, these slides will be made available to all of you post today's session. But if there's anything we discussed today, or there's any topics that you would like us to take forward and maybe discuss at a future session, please just reach out. We're always available, and you can connect with both Zarrak and I via LinkedIn or through our relevant organizations. So once again, Zarrak, thank you so much today. Thank you to AML Watcher, to Raw Compliance, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon.